Ms. Stensland, how are you this afternoon?
I am good.
We appreciate your application and look forward to hearing your opening remarks.
Thank you. I'm the end of the marathon, so congratulations. I am not the first, but I do get the privilege of being the last person to thank you for your time and your service on this committee. As a citizen, I can tell you that I am incredibly heartened to know that this process is rigorous, that it's time-consuming, because it should be, because this is an incredibly important position. So I thank you all for that. As I contemplated applying for this position and talked with a number of my trusted professional mentors, my family, about doing this, my discernment process kept coming back to what I think are three fundamental questions. The first of those was, what would be my motivation for doing it? The second one, what could I add to the current makeup of the court? And the third one is, am I ready to do this? And I would love to share my answers to those questions with you, but first I want to tell you just a little bit about myself that might not be evident from my application. As the daughter of a dairy farmer and a nurse, my sitting before you today was never something that I envisioned. And when I left the dairy farm in the 20-mile radius where I had lived my life to come out to Central College in Pella, I certainly also wasn't sure that this is what I wanted to do. I was kind of stuck between my lifelong dream of being a doctor and where I knew my true talents and passion lied, which was in critical analysis and the law. So in undergraduate school at Central, I decided to pursue a dual degree in biology and chemistry, as well as the other side, and I did undergraduate collegiate mock trial. So I was able to scratch both itches there. I wouldn't trade my science training for the world. It has given me a way to look at the world, a way to analyze problems, a way to reach solutions that I think has served me very, very well in my career. I can promise you there is very little terrifying on an academic level than having your organic chemistry professor hand you a vial and tell you you have 3 weeks to figure out what's in it. I survived, I thrived, and I was glad that I had that experience. But after taking the MCAT and the LSAT within weeks of each other, I decided that my true passion was with the law. So I decided to go to law school. I took a year off in between law school and undergraduate school, primarily so that I could get some work experience, but I also took a little extra time to marry my college sweetheart, and he and I have now been married for 16 years. During that year that I took off, I was privileged to work downstairs in this building in the Supreme Court clerk's office with Keith Richardson, who was the clerk at the time. And I got to hand stamp and physically file the 18 copies of briefs and appendices that came in with every appeal. And I will tell you that that process, again, taught me valuable lessons about the value of the frontline staff of the judicial branch, about what they add to the day-to-day administrative processes here. And probably the best part was that when filing was slow, I could sit in the back and read briefs or sneak upstairs and watch oral argument. So for a year, I had somewhat of a firsthand view of the process that goes on here, and it just cemented in my mind that I had made the right decision. Went to law school at the University of Iowa. My law school experience was different than most. Not only was I married, but my third year of law school, my husband and I were blessed to have twin sons. So I spent the majority of my third year of law school either on bed rest waiting for them to be born or in a hospital waiting for them to come home. But that time in my life taught me very important lessons about self-reliance, about being accountable to myself for getting the work done, because there was no one that was going to be there to make sure I watched the classes and read the material. It was all me. So the day that I was able to walk across the stage and get my law degree with my sons in the audience was one of the proudest days of my life. And I still, to this day, have a picture in my office of me holding one of my sons while I raised my right hand and was admitted to the bar just a few months later. After I graduated from law school, I started working at Moyer & Bergman, which eventually merged with Simmons to Perrine to become, as all law firms should, Simmons, Perrine, Moyer & Bergman. So I got both the small law firm experience and the very, very large, for Iowa standards, law firm experience. My practice ranged from bankruptcy law and creditors' rights at the start to, at the end of my private practice career, I was focused just on general civil litigation, doing a lot more post-trial briefing and appellate work, which was really what I wanted to do in my career. Probably the best part of being in private practice was that I got the privilege of working with two trusted professional mentors, Eric Lamb and Kevin Visser, who I count as friends and mentors even to this day. They taught me invaluable lessons about attention to detail, about taking each case as it comes on its own facts, about not relying on the last motion that you did and starting fresh and researching each issue as it came, about having passion for the law and for your clients. I wouldn't trade that experience for the world, but I did feel that there was something lacking in my holistic understanding of the effect of the legal process. And I had the opportunity to leave private practice and join one of my clients, Central State Bank, as their chief risk officer and general counsel. I've been in that position for almost 2 years. And I get to be the lawyer and the client now, I guess. A lot of my job is spent analyzing legal and regulatory issues, but a lot of my job is also spent as a member of the executive team, doing strategic planning, implementing strategic planning, personnel management, budgeting, a lot of administrative tasks that I didn't realize how difficult they were until I walked into the bank that day. During that whole process, my husband and I added 2 more beautiful daughters to our family. We moved to a farm in Cedar County, right outside Lisbon, the kids and some pigs, and that's where we live now, raising our children the way that we were raised on the farm, and hopefully instilling in them the same values that we learned. So to bring you back to those 3 questions, which I hope you are asking yourself of all of the applicants, the first one is what motivates me? Why do I want this job? And I think the answer to that question is twofold. First, on a professional level, I am driven and most professionally fulfilled when I am investigating legal issues and critically analyzing and writing about them. I find a uncommon, probably nerd-like joy in finding the case from 1886 that started a line of jurisprudence and following that all the way through and then analyzing for the court why my case fits or doesn't fit in that particular line, or suggesting what the next evolution in that line of cases is. I think on a professional level, that's what fulfills me the most, and that's what motivates me for this job. Personally, my motivation is the 4 smiling little faces that I get to come home to every day. They are a constant reminder to me that as a member of my community, as a member of this state, it's incumbent upon me to help make the state better, to contribute to solutions, not just identify problems. It's the same motivation that ultimately drove me to run for the school board that I now serve in my local school district as well. I think it's easy to sit on the sidelines and identify problems. It's even easier to Monday morning quarterback. I think it's harder to roll up your sleeves and be part of the solution. And applying for this job is part of my way of doing that, of rolling up my sleeves and choosing to be part of the solution. That second question, what would I add to the court? I think that my perspective is unique in private practice. I practiced in a wide variety of areas. I practiced in state and federal courts. I sued billion-dollar corporations. I represented billion-dollar corporations. I did 14-foot fence line dispute trials, and I did multi-million-dollar contract dispute trials. I represented individuals and corporations. I had the opportunity to represent children in divorce cases. I had the opportunity to serve as a city attorney for multiple municipalities close to the Cedar Rapids area. I think the breadth of my experience gives me a different perspective that might not be available to some other members of the current court. I will say this, Ronald Reagan once famously joked to Walter Mondale that he wasn't going to make the presidential election about age, and I certainly hope that is the case with you as well. I hope that is the breadth of my legal experience and the experience of all of the candidates that drives you to your decision, not just the number of years that we've been alive. I think the uniqueness of my perspective is also amplified by my current position. Whereas in private practice, I would oftentimes advise clients about what they should do with employees, that they should terminate employees. I now have the task of sitting across the table from that employee and actually doing the terminating. Rather than being advised about best practices, I have to figure out how to implement them. I have to help make the decisions about cost that sometimes mean that we don't get to do what the private practice lawyers are telling us we should be doing, because it just doesn't make sense. So I think I have learned a lot being on the other side of the desk for these past almost 2 years. And I think that's a perspective that's unique. That last question, am I ready? And I think that also has 2 answers. First answer being, I think that my experience and my education has given me the skills that are transferable to this position. I can research, I can write, I can do the legal things that justices do. I think my time at Central State Bank, combined with my time on the school board, has given me the administrative skills that are necessary for the other unseen part of this job. I'm familiar with budgeting and personnel management, service delivery in both the public and private sectors. So from a technical standpoint, I think the answer to that question is yes. But the true and honest answer, I think, is I don't know. I don't think anybody who hasn't sat in one of the 7 chairs sitting behind you truly knows or truly understands what it is like to confront these large social issues or to hold the fate of individual litigants in their hands. So I think I have the skills that are necessary to do this job, but until you actually do it, I don't think you truly know. When I started at the bank, I certainly thought I knew a lot, but I learned very quickly that I didn't know as much as I thought I did, and that my path to success required me to have humility, to understand what I didn't know, to be willing to rely on other people for advice, and to be willing to find the answers. And I can commit to each of you that if I was given the opportunity, I would approach this task with that same humility, with the same curiosity and hard work ethic that I've exhibited my whole career. And I thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and I would love to answer some of your questions.
Stensland, thank you very much for your opening remarks. We'll start with Mr. Gray. Can you take a microphone? Take the gray one.
You have a remarkable breadth of experience, but I was wondering, some of the candidates here have been district court judges. Do you think being a district court judge would be helpful to being a member of the Iowa Supreme Court?
I think it would be helpful, and I think it's an important perspective to have, and I think one that we need to maintain on the court. I will say that. I think on a 7-member court, I think it's important that we have perspectives from all different areas, and I think certainly having the district court perspective is one of those. I do think that being a district court judge is a different skill set than being an appellate judge. I think the skill set that makes a lot of our district courts judges successful is the ability to make those quick determinations, the ability to make credibility determinations, fact-finding decisions. I can tell you that as a trial lawyer, I was devoted to fact-finding, but it wasn't what I enjoyed doing. I was much more able and apt at application of law to fact. So I think that it's an important perspective. I don't think it's a necessary perspective for every member of the court to have, but I think it's, of the 7, I think we do need to have somebody on the bench who has that perspective. I think it's important.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Harbaugh? Ms. O'Brien?
No questions.
Mrs. Roberts?
To follow up on Mr. Gray's question, your work now as general counsel, how do you think that prepares you to serve on the Supreme Court?
Well, I will tell you that no 2 days at my current job are the same, and what I wake up thinking I'm doing is usually not what I'm doing by 8 o'clock in the morning. I think one of the things that I've been exposed to, aside from the administrative part of being an executive at a community bank here in Iowa, is just the sheer scope of issues that confront even a business of our size on a daily basis. I will have to address issues from HR, and then we'll jump to regulatory issues, and then in the afternoon I'll get served with something and we'll have to, address that situation. So I think it has continued to provide me with the opportunity to broaden my knowledge of a lot of different areas of law. But I think more than anything else, my work at Central State Bank has given me insight into the administrative work that the justices are required to do. And again, this is a public arena, but I sit in on budget meetings, I sit in on strategic planning meetings. I have the conversations where we talk about there's X number of resources and we'd like to do Y, but we can't do all of that. And so that kind of decision-making process is something that I wasn't exposed to in private practice on the management side, but I have been in my current position. So.
Ms. Conover?
Ms. Stensland, along those lines, I don't know for certain, but I would imagine that someone sitting on the Supreme Court needs some skills in terms of being able to collaborate with your colleagues on opinions, at least engaging in the give and take discussion that I'm sure occurs among the justices. And in addition, the Supreme Court is to some extent the ambassadors of the judicial branch to the rest of the state, to the other branches of government, to the people of the state of Iowa, and so on. What background do you have in sort of that collaborative decision making, kind of putting the organization's best face out there, either at the bank or in your private practice, that would lend itself to this position?
I think in both instances I've been exposed to kind of the collaborative analysis and decision-making process. Certainly when I was trying cases at the firm, There was always a discussion amongst the team that was involved about what was the best way to present the facts, what were the best arguments, and sometimes that was, we didn't always agree. Clearly, there's different ways to present any case to a jury or to a judge, and so, and through that process, through that evaluation process, we all came to a point where we arrived on the best way to do it. I think that has been heightened at the bank. Ultimately, I sit on a team of people, and of course, there's a CEO at the bank, and he ultimately directs what we do. But he's very good at listening to the input from everyone else, and we have weekly meetings, if not daily meetings, where we discuss, okay, what's the best way to handle this situation? And again, we don't always agree, but we all take the time to voice our opinions, and ultimately, we do reach a decision, and once that decision's reached, we're all on board with implementing that decision, which I think is important. I think in terms of being an ambassador, I learned very early in my career that you could run into your clients at a baseball game, you could run into them at the grocery store, and so you could never really turn it off. You always had to be ready to be a positive role model, if you will, for the clients that might see you. That is also, I think, heightened at the bank. Wherever I am a representative of Central State Bank, and my actions reflect directly on the bank, and so I have to be cognizant of that at all times, and make sure that I'm making the right choices in what I'm doing. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Mr. Bloom?
No, no questions.
Mr. Goodman?
No questions. Thank you.
Mr. Sukup?
No questions.
Ms. Diekman? Ms. Sinclair? Mr. Bevel?
No questions.
Dr. Taylor? Mr. Diaz? I see all the shaking of the heads there. Mr. Berger? Ms. Bowden? Ms. Pearson? I have a question, and are you a national bank or are you a state bank?
We're an Iowa State chartered bank.
Okay, so you still end up in state court then when
We do.
you do the litigation.
Correct.
What, when you were practicing, how much of your practice would you say was in state courts around the state courts versus federal courts?
At the start of my practice, when I was doing bankruptcy work, obviously I was in bankruptcy court, federal court the majority of the time, so I would say probably the first 3-4 years of my practice when I was doing a lot of bankruptcy work. Federal work was, I don't know, 60-65% of the work that I did. As bankruptcy work slowed down just because of changes in the economy, then my practice shifted much more significantly to state court. And while I did federal civil jury trials as well, I would say that 80% of the work that I did was in state court.
Okay,
So.
any other questions?
It's like being the last oral argument of the day. Everybody's tired.
No, we're not tired, but because we have a lot of work to do ahead of
Yeah.
time. But I think you've done a wonderful job, and we appreciate your application and wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.